Welcome to Through the Lens of Christ, a podcast designed to have conversation about things that are happening in culture, questions that we may have theologically, and other questions that impact our day in and day out lives. Our desire is to be able to build these conversations and to be able to get us to critically think not just about the events that are happening, but how do we see these events through the lens of Christ. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I hope it helps you to critically think through issues in our lives.
Good morning, Ashley, Steve. How you doing?
Good. Good morning.
Good. Good morning. How are you?
Good. Good. Actually, I didn't notice are your flowers new in the background? They seem bright and cheery.
They're Legos.
Are they really? Well, they look.
Yeah.
You could have not admitted that. They look great.
Thanks. I made them myself.
Never wilt.
That's good. It's got just a nice little ray of sunshine on this somewhat gloomy day so far.
Right.
So yeah, we're together again, talk about scripture, about how, and especially on a text like this is more of it's pretty straightforward in terms of what happened. It's more of what do we do with it, right? Why is it in here? And the practical application becomes extremely important. But so we've been talking through Acts 15. This is the end of 15. And really the whole point of chapter 15 is talking about conflict. One theological, one personal. And so how do we handle those two things differently? And then where's sin in all of that? So with that, Steve will start.
Okay. So starting in chapter 15, verse 36. And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are." Now Barnabas wanted to take with them John called Mark, but Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose a sharp disagreement, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches.
Again, pretty straightforward, but pretty important text. So what do we catch?
I think it's super interesting about Paul that the whole goal of this is let's go check on the people that we've ministered to and make sure they're doing well, and see how we can care for them, but is very quick to be like, but not him. Leave him behind because it's personal.
Yeah, and I think it
seems to be personal. Yeah, it seems to be personal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, as in any good disagreement, Paul's got a good reason for it, right? He's like, hey, listen, it's not. He's so worried about the people, and John Mark has failed so significantly, and we don't know, I don't know exactly what went down, but it looks like just that things got hard, and John Mark said, "No, I'm good. I'm going home." And Paul's like, "Man, how damaging would that be to go back to these people?" And it starts to get hard, and we're just going to turn and leave again. And but again, your point is what Barnabas is trying to do, which is, shouldn't we love everybody, Paul? And shouldn't we try to reconcile and try to restore everybody? And where's grace and mercy? And so I just think it's interesting that the text never leads us to who's right or wrong. It just says, listen, we are people and we're filled with sin. And even somebody like Paul and Barnabas, who did great ministry together, can allow themselves to be divided over something seemingly insignificant.
Yeah. Is this text talked about, this situation talked about anywhere else? I don't think it is, right? This is just a encapsulated deal right here. Yeah.
I mean, it's earlier in Acts, it's alluded to that they were together and separated, but no, this is the only place that it's discussed.
Yeah. I mean, so my kind of take on that whole thing is, well, they definitely had a disagreement. It was a sharp one. I mean, it says sharp disagreement. What happened? What did it mean? Was it a deep rift? Were they angry? Or they just disagreed? I mean, we could, I don't know.
I
Right?
think
So
I brought up, so I preached at North, like the word used here for they parted or separated,
Mhm.
the Greek actually means they departed, divided. And the only other place it's used in scripture is in Revelation 6, where it says the heavens rolled up like a scroll. So like, and it's in the middle of God's wrath being poured out. So I think the image is pretty violent, right? Like there was anger, they left not going, you know, hey, I hope things go well for you. They left like, you're dead to me and we're gone.
well, it could be. One other use of the word in scripture is important, but not conclusive to me. I'm just right. So
Yeah.
it could be. I'm not saying it's not.
Well, I would say extra biblically, that's the only time the word's used. Like
Yeah.
I don't think there's debate here that this was a very large frustration. And I think the point is that they're saying, listen, this wasn't just a we agree to disagree. This was a significant rift in the relationship. And again, I think it points back to the sin issue in us, not just a little like, I have a different opinion.
Yeah, well, that seems to be I mean, we can leave that, but it seems to be the point of the text, right?
Yeah.
So the point of the text is the sin nature, our sin nature compels us to divide things, right?
Right.
And to split and to go our own way. And then surely I don't know, the other side of it is God uses all those things.
Exactly. Right.
So,
It's all about like our sin and his redemption and the
mhm.
reconciliation. And yeah, I mean, that's the only other time you see these names brought up again, come back, at least Barnabas and Silas and Mark come back later in terms of they're all doing ministry together again in some way. So
Mhm.
where they departed divided, God worked that back together for his good, for our good, and for the good of current and future believers.
And one would think that you don't know this for sure. We're going to conjecture again here, but it wasn't a disaster for either one of them. The Lord worked in their lives in different ways at that they moved in different directions, and therefore there were different things that happened to them because of the directional split. So each one's path diverged, and the Lord worked on them in different ways in those two different paths. And as he does all of us, the different things that we do.
Yeah, and I mean they while they were frustrated with each other, they didn't actually lose the vision of what the greater purpose is, right? They both, it's not like they got so mad at each other that they went home and stayed there, right? They got mad at each other and then they went into ministry and said we're gonna further the work. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the weirdest thing that, I mean, sin is really horrible. It's really bad. I mean, but for those that believe in the Lord, those that trust in his purposes, that are his, called, trust in him. Sin is good. I mean,
Yeah,
it is good. And that's
right.
in one sense.
Right. It's used for his good, right?
That's right.
Used, right. I mean, there's not, sin doesn't exist outside of God's sovereignty.
That's right.
And so it's not a matter of like sometimes, I think we think like sin is trying to destroy God. And in its purest form, right? It's an affront to God, and Satan is using sin to separate us from God. But it's not possible. And God is still larger than sin, and God is still using it to draw us to him and open our eyes to him. And yeah, I think the guilt and shame that comes with sin, the guilt and shame that come what should be conviction to us as believers, which is really a gift to draw us closer to Christ. Sometimes we can use it as a barrier, like, well, look at how I failed. I could never be good enough. Look at how I, messed up. God could never use this. And it's just not true.
Or look what's happened. Look what's happened to me. God can't possibly love me. These things have happened to me, and I've failed in these ways. There's no way that he can love me.
Yes. Yeah.
That's just not. It's very likely the opposite is true. But for a believer, absolutely is the opposite is true. I mean, I think of Think of the difference between men and angels. Angels have never sinned. They're, I mean, fantastic beings, right? They're fantastic beings. But we're in a whole different class of being because of being here and being sinful people and having a fallen nature and being redeemed from that, and then living in heaven together in the future with the angels. So much so that we'll rule over them, that they're going to be, in some ways, will be distinct from them, and will be known for being redeemed people, which is somehow, well, it does show different glories of God that the angels can never show.
Yeah. And you think about like John Mark, who was perfectly suited for guilt and shame, right? He failed.
Mhm.
He's the one at the middle of this. He walked away from ministry at some critical point. He he could certainly be like, I'm garbage. And then Barnabas kind of encourages him back into the ministry. And then Paul's like, nope, you're still garbage, right? You don't deserve to be here. I mean, this is, I would think, like, if I over personalize it, I would take this very harshly, right? I would be like, man, you know what? I failed, and now Paul doesn't want me, and I must not be suited for the ministry, and I'm not good enough. And then, he goes on to write the Gospel of Mark, and he goes on to be in ministry with Peter, and he goes like, so yeah, you're right. This idea of redemption and restoration and reconciliation, and it's a purely a God thing.
To think that we know, I know we could go this a little further, to think that we know what's going on with us in a way how would you do that? We look at our situations and we assess ourselves and we think we know what's happening. And we almost never know what's, do you ever, I don't know what's happening right now. I mean, God's working in so many different ways. We're all lost and confused without a rudder. I mean, the only way that we can have any idea of what's happening is by looking to the Lord, the only consistent thing in this whole universe, and the one that set it all up. Everyone else is rudderless. They don't know what's going on. They can't even tell up from down, right and wrong. And we have a difficult time with that too. It's only when we're actually seeing the true north of Christ that we can actually know what's happening. And all those negative things, that's him just working his sanctification in us in those bad times, those disagreements and those sufferings, to change us into a new person, so that the next time we'll handle in a different way, or we handle everything in a different way.
Yeah. No, and I think about like it's so easy. So if you're John Mark, right, and if and then again, I don't know what he felt, right, but if he had like a normal response to this, it's so easy for like Barnabas to go, it's okay, keep your chin up, it's going to be fine, God's still working, he's in control, he's right. But when it happens to us, it's so much harder to have that view. You're right. I mean, we're so rudderless that any little bump in the road tends to push us off course and moves us in different directions. And even it's easy for us to encourage other people and try to lift them up, but to actually allow that to happen in our own lives is sometimes difficult. But again, we talk about it a lot, but it goes back to the point of being in community together. That if John Mark just separated and went and sat in his house, it was like, nope, nobody needs me, nobody wants me, I'm worthless, God can't use me, he doesn't like me, look how I failed, that's where he's going to end up. And instead, Barnabas loved him enough to say, no, you're coming with me, and we're going back into the ministry together, and we're going to do this together.
We're rudderless and so all-knowing that we've assessed ourselves, and we put ourselves in as to who we are, and we're absolutely there without, like you said, community chiming in, without the Lord breaking in. We just self-assess, and then we self-determine who others are too. And so we're like, I'm who I am, and boy, I know it. And you're who you are, and I sure know it too. And who's the Lord of that situation? So the Lord has to break in on us, and then others break in that know the Lord, and we have a different understanding. Yeah, that's good.
And again, kind of, you look at the impacts of the rifts and how we respond, and how, like, wherever this conversation started, right? It started with we should go back and talk to the other believers, right? We should go back and check in on them. We should go back. And then it looks like it escalated quickly. Like, it doesn't look like this was a 3-day conversation. It was like 5 minutes of, I'm not taking that guy with us. and hey, but we should, and it was, look, we're done, right? And we're walking away from this thing. And it's the, we all have that tendency to respond in that way, right? You said it earlier, we're rudderless and all knowing, right? So I can sit here and be so confident in my opinion, in my view, and I always think somebody else is wrong. And James 4:1 says that the beginning of all quarrels begins within us. And so the point is that at any time, Barnabas or Paul could have taken a much different approach here and said, listen, Paul could have said, I'm allowing John Mark's failure to cloud my vision, and I get it. We need to talk about this. And Barnabas could have said, look, I'm given way too much grace here. We've got to encourage, but we've got to disciple so he's ready. And right, either of them could have moved, and neither of them were willing to, because they were both convinced they were right. And we allow our rightness to just escalate so quickly. And I think it's often easily seen in our marriages, right? Our relationships, because we're so close to those people. But I can't think of how many times that I've wanted to die on a hill for no other reason than that I know I'm right. And when you start to take a position of, look, I'm the one that's wrong. I'm always the one that's wrong. That doesn't mean the other person isn't wrong too, right? That it's right. I mean, there's enough space for all of us to be wrong. But my sin prevents me from being right. And so I'm wrong. I'm looking at it wrong. I'm understanding it wrong. It doesn't mean I don't have the Spirit in me and I don't have something valuable to offer. But the beginning of all quarrels begins within us. And I just think it's I think that's part of the importance of the text here, is to say, look, we easily end up in the same place, and we've got to be careful that we're not getting our own rightness out of priority.
Yeah. So, or the way to think about it too, maybe is this, that we've got a conviction that we need to stick with our convictions, right? If the conviction, we feel it's a godly conviction, we have to stick with it. But even in the communication of that conviction, I didn't communicate it well, I didn't perform it well, I didn't think through it well, timing, all those things, right? And sometimes I think the Lord just brings that stuff to us so we can go different directions and deal with it.
Well, you're talking about conviction. Like, I don't know that I'm confident neither Barnabas or Paul were right, but I'm also confident that God was in control. And so God likely was convicting them that it was time in their ministry to move in separate directions. And he needed two teams to head out instead of one. And they could have done that in a way that was much more loving and kind and Christ-centered. They chose a different way to handle it. It doesn't mean that God wasn't behind it.
Right. I'm thinking in the context of marriage, we have different opinions or different views on something, and one's right and one's wrong, or both are. The way I would put it is they're both wrong, because we never have pure motives, and then we communicate poorly, or we receive poorly, and we assign motives, and we attribute good motives to ourselves and poor motives to the other person, and all those things are messy, and they're not always true, and they're never right. So
right. And then we depart divided, right? That's why the divorce rate is 50% plus, because we're never going to get along. We're never going to be able to do this. So we just need to be done.
Because we sometimes just can't handle disagreement.
Right.
We can't agree to disagree on something and then stay together. Right. Then conflict happens. So that's a definite problem. That goes back to, we've talked about that before, where part of the mark of a Christian is we're put together in a church with people that should not be so much like us. The understanding is that the gospel is for all and the church is for all, and so we don't have flavors of churches. Well, this is where the Generation Z people go. This is where the boomers go. This is where, right? No, this is where this race goes and that race goes, or this ethnicity. No, we're supposed to be together and being able to learn and love each other in spite of and for our differences. That to me is the loving mark of a Christian, rather than, hey, I get along with all the people that are just like me. It's fantastic. You look like you're like me. Come join me. You can be with us too. That's earthly silliness.
It is, and I think, and that's partly why I think chapter 15 is built the way that it is, because there's two types of discussions, right? There's a theological discussion, and that should divide us if we're not on the same page, right? And I'm talking like the main order things, right? The high priority, Christ's deity, his restoration, like all those pieces are like, look, we've got to agree here, and if we don't, we need to separate.
Mhm.
And then there's all the other 99% of topics that come up that are just us being people and us having differences of opinion. And honestly, I can be my feelings may be conviction and they may not be, right? They may just be feelings. And so I can't just die on the hill of, well, God told me, or, the Spirit is telling me, or that's why we need community and we need enough love for each other to say, man, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. Like, I think about the right way to have the conversation between Paul and Barnabas, and I likely wouldn't either. So this isn't like condemnation, but for Barnabas to go, man, I'm really feeling like John Mark should come back into the ministry, right? Like, I really feel like it's time. And Paul say, well, I'm really concerned. We got a huge job in front of us. And for them to just have, like, the debate is good, the conflict is good, but it's where they went with it that it just represents our sin.
Yeah, in one sense, we should be self-doubters and be confident in the Lord, because I also want to be changed by the Lord and not by other people necessarily. Right? I want to be changed by other people that have the Lord in them, and the Lord grace flows through that person to me to change me. Right? That's the way change really happens. And but we tend to lean in and try to change people of our own accord, and we look at ourselves and we don't doubt ourselves enough. I do feel like I feel like I doubt myself a lot, and I need to doubt myself more. Mhm.
No, same, right? I think that's we should, as the more mature we get in faith, we should be more and more sure of theological conviction, right? We should be more and more sure of biblical truth, and we should be more and more aware of our own fallacies, right? More and more aware of our own, inability. And I feel the same way. I'm like, 20 years ago, I wouldn't be nearly as able to say that, look, the beginning of all quarrels begins within me. And today I'm like, I know that's true. I don't always know how it's true, right? I can't sit and discern in the middle of my frustration that it's me, right? But I can certainly look back and be like, nah, it's totally me. But yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Anything else? I think we're close to time, I think.
Okay.
All right. Well, this is, again, good practical conversation, and I think Steve brought it up earlier, but just the idea that God is still working in all of these things, and the point of the text isn't to point out the horrible nature of Paul and Barnabas. It's to point out the sin nature of them is just the same sin nature as us, but yet there is a God who reconciles and a God who restores and redeems, and that's where we put our hope. And that any of our debates that we have among people, and any of our, especially we're talking believers, right? Any of these conflicts and disagreements, and like they shouldn't be blowing up. What they should be doing is shaping us and guiding us and drawing us closer together to each other and to Christ.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.